Hello over there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is L24 News, streaming live from the capital Algiers, and coming up next in our news program. On the 25th day of the special military operation in Ukraine, the Russian army launched the deadliest attack ever in Ukraine port city of Mariupol. 80% of the residential buildings of this city have been destroyed as Russian tanks are visible everywhere. The Ukrainian government estimates at least 20,000 foreigners have joined the International Legion of the Territorial Defense of Ukraine, foreign legion established in the late February shortly after Russia operation began. At least 5 civilians killed in Kharkiv overnight, including a 9-year-old boy in just one district on the night of March 19 to 20, according to Markov, an aide to the head of Kharkiv police. Sitting down under the hot sun, hungry women and children await food aid in camp as thousands trek to Somalia's capital. Hello again and welcome. Those were today's headlines. Starting with the latest updates on the situation in Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky suspended pro-Russian political parties, saying that the activities by politicians aim to disorder the collaboration will not succeed. Zelensky condemns Russia's siege of Mariupol as war crime as Russian forces push deeper into the port city. The British Ministry of Defense says that Russia has failed to gain control of Ukraine's airspace. China says it stands for maintaining peace and opposing war, and that time will prove that its position on the Ukraine war are on the right side of history. The United Nations maintains at least 847 civilians killed in Ukraine, 6.5 million internally displaced. Russia claims it used Kanzal hypersonic missile for the first time in Ukraine. Russia Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov said for the second day in a row that Russia had used hypersonic missiles in Ukraine, this time to destroy a fuel reserve of the Ukrainian army in the south of the country.
From the waters of the Caspian Sea, cruise missiles based in the Sea Caliber, as well as from the Crimean airspace, hypersonic aeroballistic missiles fired by the aeronautical system Kinjal destroyed an important reserve of fuels and lubricants of the Ukrainian armed forces near the colony of Konstantinovka. From this base, the main fuel supplies for the Ukrainian armored vehicles were made in the combat zones of the southern Ukraine.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said that the siege of Mariupol will go down in history for what he is calling war crimes by Russia's military. He also addressed his people by saying that the ongoing negotiations with Russia were not simple or pleasant, but they are necessary.
They have made it obvious that they will do all possible to make the humanitarian situation in Ukrainian cities a justification for Ukrainians to work with the occupiers. This is a crime against humanity. They will be held accountable, without a doubt.
In same line of thoughts, as Ukrainian forces continue to hold off Russian attempts to advance on the capital of Kiev, civilians in Mariupol struggle to go through humanitarian corridors to flee the city as challenge of the Russian forces intensifies, which led to destruction of several buildings in the city. Families in Mariupol continue to flee in an attempt to save their lives as conflict rises to highest level. Hussam Ayadi.
Evacuations from Ukraine's besieged cities proceeded Saturday along 8 of 10 humanitarian corridors, Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk said, with a total of 6,623 people were evacuated, including 4,128 from Mariupol, who were taken northwest to Zaporizhia.
There is no Mariupol. We sat in the cellar for 10 days and did not leave once. We neither had water nor electricity. It was good that in the neighbor's yard we had access to the bomb shelter. Well, cellar, I wouldn't really call it a bomb shelter.
Russian forces pushed deeper into the besieged and battered port city of Mariupol, where heavy fighting on Saturday shut down a major steel plant, and local authorities pleaded for more Western help.
On the 15th, we left Mariupol in a column of vehicles. Our homes are destroyed, bombs landed in the yards, and in every flat the windows were blown out. So we took our parrot, the dog, and together with the whole family we got into the car and drove. First, we drove to the Bolis-Ryazk-Kosa to stay overnight, and then to Berdyansk. There was no fuel in Berdyansk. Only today we had the chance to fill the car with 20 liters. People were almost fighting for fuel there. Now we arrived here in Zaporizhzhia.
The fall of Mariupol, the scene of some of war's worst suffering, would mark a major battlefield advance for the Russians, who are largely bogged down outside major cities, more than 3 weeks into the biggest land military operation in Europe since World War II. The Mariupol City Council claimed Russian soldiers have forced several thousand city residents to be relocated to Russia, at a time when families of Mariupol continue to seek shelter away from the Black Sea port city.
At least 40 soldiers were killed when a Russian bomb hit the barracks of military facility in the city of Mykolaiv in southern Ukraine on Friday morning, according to journalists who documented the scene hours after the attack. Images verified by the Washington Post showed a multi-story building flooding inward on itself as gas plumes of smoke rise above it. During a Russian soldier advance on Ukraine's capital, Kiev, the mayor claimed that Russian forces will never ever be able to enter the city and that civilians will fight and never give up. Sufyan Kantoron was follow.
Vitaly Klitschko made his remarks just hours after an apartment complex in northern Kiev was hit by what is suspected to be artillery firing, killing one person and injuring a dozen others. The Western arms deliveries have been vital in enabling Ukrainians to fight Russian forces so far. Klitschko said that he believed that Ukrainian forces would continue to repel Russians' attempts to enter Kyiv, even as they edge closer to the heart of the capital. The attack destroyed apartments on several floors, damaging both front and back sides of the residential structure. Ukrainian authorities say the besieged city of Mariupol has been subjected to relentless bombardment since Russian troops surrounded it in the 2nd March. Since then, roughly 400,000 people who remain in Mariupol have been left without access to water, food and medicine. Heat and phone services and electricity in many areas have been cut.
Authorities in Ukraine's eastern city of Kharkiv says at least 5 civilians have been killed in the latest Russian shelling. Regional police in Kharkiv, Ukraine's scored largest city, said that victims of the Russian artillery attack Sunday include a 9-year-old boy. Kharkiv has been besieged by Russian forces since the start of the operation and has come under a persistent barrage. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for peace again and urged talks, saying that negotiations are neither easy nor pleasant, but they are necessary because lives are at stake.
I'm sure you understand that negotiations are not easy and pleasant, but they are necessary because lives are at stake. Ukraine has always sought a peaceful solution. What we want most today is peace, because we count every victim. Because for us, every family destroyed and every house ruined is too much.
The Australian Prime Minister announced extension of the against Russia following its military operation in Ukraine, immediately banning all the exports aluminium and bauxite while promising banning all exports and humanitarian aid for Ukraine as well as coal to help Ukraine's generator power. The aim of sanction is to hit aluminium production in Russia, which depends on Australia for 20% of its alumina.
The government has imposed an immediate ban on Australian exports of alumina and aluminium ores, including bauxite, to Russia, which will limit its capacity to produce aluminium, which is a critical export for Russia. Late last week, it came to our attention that there was a ship that was due to dock in Australia this week to collect a load of alumina bound for Russia. That boat is not going to Russia with our alumina. Last night, we put the sanctions in place which will prevent that from occurring. Australia will donate 70,000 tonnes of thermal coal. This will help Ukraine's power generators operating and supplying electricity to the power grid at this critical time.
On the other topic, Germany, which relies heavily on the Russian gas, has major concerns of securing supplies for the next winter and is doing all it can to secure alternatives. Minister for Economic Affairs Robert Habeck said Saturday, if we do not obtain more gas next winter and if deliveries from Russia were to be cut, then we would not have enough gas to heat all our houses and keep all our industry going. Habeck headed for Qatar, one of the world's three biggest exporters of liquefied natural gas, which European states are increasingly counting on as means of winning themselves of Russian gas in the wake of Moscow's military operation in Ukraine.
This means that if we don't get more gas by the next winter, and the supply connections from Russia would be cut off or torn down, we would not have enough gas to keep all houses warm and all industry running. So gas is mainly used in industry at the beginning of the supply chains, and then there is a kind or there can be a kind of domino effect.
Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, visiting New Delhi, urges his counterpart to change his tone vis-à-vis Moscow, but their joint statement refrained from condemning the invasion of Ukraine.
We discussed at length in a small committee today, in depth on the situation in Ukraine. The invasion of Russia in Ukraine is a serious incident, which undermines the very foundation of the international order. We must respond to it in a firm and resolute manner. I conveyed these thoughts to Prime Minister Modi, emphasizing that unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force must never be allowed in any region.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin held a press conference in Sofia with Bulgarian Prime Minister Kiril Petkov, with whom he discussed strengthening the eastern flank of NATO. The Bulgarian Prime Minister says that his country will continue to do everything possible to help the Ukrainians, but that sending military aid will not be possible.
Our conversation was focused on what we can do to strengthen the eastern flank here, and what we can do to increase interoperability.
Bulgaria will continue to do everything possible to help the Ukrainians in this harsh war and this enormous aggression that the Russian Federation is inflicting on them. But being so close to the conflict for now, sending military assistance to Ukraine will not be possible. It should only be granted after the approval by the parliament.
Now moving on to the accusation of Nazism. Scholars call Putin's claim wrong and morally repugnant. Far-right Azov battalion integrated into Ukraine's army. Some in U.S. says the Azov battalion should be selected as terrorist group. Reports of anti-Jewish activities. China is very worried about Ukraine's deteriorating humanitarian situation and condemns reports of rise civilian fatalities and fleeing. The most pressing goal for all sides is to immediately cease fire and end the battle, to display greatest caution to protect civilians' safety and basic humanitarian requirements, and to avoid a greater humanitarian disaster.
China is very worried about Ukraine's deteriorating humanitarian situation and condemns reports of a rise in civilian fatalities and fleeing. The most pressing goal for all sides is to immediately cease fire and end the battle, to display greatest caution, to protect civilian safety and basic humanitarian requirements, and to avoid a greater humanitarian disaster.
During a speech at his Conservative Party Congress in Blackpool, Northern England, attended by the Ukraine's ambassador in London, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson warned that it would be a mistake to regain normal relations with Russia, even if the Russian operation in Ukraine stopped, and added that the time has come to choose between freedom and oppression.
And with every year that Ukraine progressed, not always easily, towards freedom and democracy and open markets, he feared the Ukrainian example, and he feared the implicit reproach to himself. Because in Putin's Russia, you get jailed for 15 years just for calling an invasion an invasion. And if you stand against Putin in an election, you get poisoned or shot. And
3 Russian cosmonauts take off aboard a Soyuz rocket for the International Space Station ISS amid extreme tension between Russia and the West linked to the conflict in Ukraine. Miriam on what's follow.
3 Russian cosmonauts have arrived at the International Space Station. The men were the first new arrivals on the station since the beginning of the Russian military operation in Ukraine last month, and the trio will spend the next 6.5 months aboard the space station. The Russian Space Corporation Roscosmos cosmonauts blasted off successfully from the Russia-leased Baikonur launch facility in their Soyuz aircraft in Kazakhstan on Friday, joining 2 Russians, 4 Americans, and a German on the orbiting outpost. A video taken as the spacecraft showed the cosmonauts wearing yellow flight suits with blue accents, color that matched the Ukrainian flag. It was unclear what message the yellow uniforms were intended to send, and when asked about the suits, Oleg Artmiev said that every crew chose their own.
It became our turn to pick a color, but in fact we had accumulated a lot of yellow material, so we need to use it. So that's why we had to wear yellow.
Since the start of the Russian military operation began, many people have used Ukrainian flag and its colors to show solidarity with the country. Does that mean that the Russian cosmonauts support Ukrainians, or is it just a coincidence?
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov sees no reasons to believe that the OPEC Plus mechanism will be dismantled, as no one is interested in that. Lavrov said that the OPEC Plus format will still be needed once new participants emerge on the global oil supply market.
We've noted, by the way, that the Americans turned to Saudi Arabia about it, the Emirates, Qatar, on the gas and oil. And those countries I mentioned, as well as Venezuela and Iran, say clearly when discussing possible new participants of the oil market, we all support the OPEC Plus format, where all quotas for each participant are discussed and agreed upon by consensus. And I see no reason to believe that the OPEC Plus mechanism will be dismantled, as no one is interested in that.
According to Saudi Arabia's state-run media, Yemen's Houthi rebels have launched a barrage of drones and missiles attack on Saudi Arabia, targeting a liquefied natural gas factory, a water purification plant, an oil facility, and a power station. The attack did not result in injuries, according to Saudi-led military coalition battling in Yemen, but they did damage civilian vehicles and homes in the region. More than 4.3 million Somalis have been left hungry and thirsty as a result of the scorching heat and failing rains that have now entered the 3rd year in Somalia. Thousands more people have been forced to flee their homes in search of food and water in cities and towns. Somalia has seen a rise in people lacking life-saving assistance in the past 3 years, from 5.4 million in 2020 to 5.9 million in 2021, to the current situation now, 7.7 million in 2022. Algiers has reacted to Spain's recent decision to consider Morocco's autonomy plan for the Sahara as the most serious, realistic and credible basis for resolving the conflict in the region. The Algerian government has decided to call its ambassador in Madrid to consult the decision of the Spanish President Pedro Sanchez immediately, according to a statement from the Algerian Foreign Ministry. Marwa Bleor.
Spain made a radical change of position on the highly sensitive issue of Western Sahara by publicly supporting for the first time the position of Rabat, putting an end to a major diplomatic squabble between the two countries. Algeria has recalled its ambassador to Spain over Madrid's recent change of policy on Western Sahara. An Algerian foreign ministry statement condemned the abrupt about-turn by Madrid, which had previously maintained neutrality in the decades-old conflict for the territory between Morocco and the Algerian-backed Polisario Front independence movement. The move comes hours after Spain announced that it was endorsing a Moroccan plan for autonomy in the disputed Western Sahara region in what Madrid called the beginning of a new phase in relations.
Today we are entering a new phase of our relations with Morocco and are definitely closing crisis with a strategic partner. Spain considers the autonomy initiative presented in 2007 is the most serious, realistic and credible basis for the resolution of this dispute.
Meanwhile, the Polisario Front movement has accused Spain of making a grave error after it changed its position. The Algerian-backed Polisario separatists took up arms in the 1970s and have continued to demand an independence referendum on the basis of a 1991 deal that included a ceasefire. Spain appeared to shift its policy on the Western Sahara, which Morocco considers its own, but where an Algerian-backed independence movement demands a sovereign state.
Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, Mr. Abdallah Mamra, paid a working and friendship visit to People's Republic of China at the invitation of State Councilor, Minister of Foreign Affairs of China, from March 19th to 21st. The two foreign ministers exchanged on this occasion in-depth views on China-Algeria relations and regional and international issues of common concern and reached broad agreement on many topics. 5 pharaonic tombs were exposed in Egypt at Saqqara in the cemetery of Memphis, the capital of ancient Pharaoh's empire, Islam Seed.
5 pharaonic tombs in a good condition were unveiled Saturday in Egypt at Saqqara, in the necropolis of Memphis, the capital of the pharaoh's ancient empire. The 5 tombstones were discovered by Egyptian archaeologists northeast of the pyramid of King Merenre, who ruled over Egypt around 2270 BC.
We found 5 graves with inscriptions. We also found 108 wells, 108 funerary wells. Only 5 or 6 of them contain inscriptions.
The site of Saqqara, a little more than 15 kilometers south of the famous pyramids of the Giza plateau, is classified as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and is known for the famous pyramid with degrees of the pharaoh Djeser, the first of the pharaonic era. This monument, built around 2700 BC by architect Imhotep, is considered one of the oldest on the surface of the globe.
We discovered 5 tombs, all of them back to the Old Kingdom and the first intermediate periods. So we took about 4,000 years old tombs, well painted, well decorated.
According to the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, the graves contain the remains of senior officials.
Some of them, he used to play the turn of being the mayor. Some others, the supervisor of the cemetery, the supervisor of the palace, the stamp or the seal carrier. Some others, they've got also the titles of the supervisor of the garden.
Already in January 2021, Egypt had unveiled new archaeological treasures in the necropolis of Saqqara, including some 50 sarcophagi of the new empire, more than 3,000 years old, ensuring that they made it possible to rewrite history of this period. The Egyptian authorities hope to inaugurate in the coming months the Great Egyptian Museum near the Giza plateau and count on these new discoveries to revive tourism hit hard by COVID-19.
Moving on now to sports, Madrid have been very consistent all season and will win the title And ahead of tonight's game, within the press conference, Madrid's manager Carlo Ancelotti talked about the French striker who is going to be absent, saying that Benzema is a very important member of our squad. So now we will need to look for solutions since we won't have him. On the other side, Xavi's eagerness has recognized that the White House is favored for being the leader of the competition. But this does not mean that the Barca will not go to look for another party.
The last Clásico in the Bernabeu was incredible, and the fans will want to repeat. We'll do all we can to repeat that night. We must approach this game in a serious way. It's a special match, and a demanding one. We feel good and confident. We're facing a strong team in a good form, so we need to have a complete performance. Benzema is a very important part of this team, so we need to find a different solution without him. I have decided how to replace him, but I'm not going to tell you here. There were many options, and I have picked what I think is best for this game.
It's a spectacular day to do a big party, reflecting the idea of the big stages such as Clásico. We have grown like team from November, but this does not mean at all. It does not indicate at all how you arrive. It's necessary to show personality and try our model of game. Real Madrid is very well in big moments, but we have to play better, with the strategy of having the ball possession as much as we can.
To this end, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.